Now, let's shift focus just slightly. The International Monetary Fund Managing Director, Christine Lagarde, says the institution will likely downgrade its 2016 global growth forecast again amid dimming economic prospects. Now, growth remains slow due to weak demand, flagging trade and investment and growing inequality.
When you look deep down at the economic growth prospects, at the growth potential, at the productivity, we are not getting very good signals. And we will probably be revising slightly down our forecast for growth in 2016. So that surface which I was describing is still at risk. And we will know better probably in 2017 whether the transition from UK within the European Union to UK differently is safe and sound, or whether it will bring about more volatility and create more difficulties from an economic point of view.
Well, let's delve further into the current global economic state, Africa's role at the G20 as well. Ahmed Yacoub, head of the Economic News Department at Al Youm El Sabe, joins us in Egypt. And from Washington, D.C., Rowie Gruttenberg joins us as well. Rowie, I'll just start with you. Now, when it comes to Africa and the G20, traditionally, members have their, of course, nationally driven African strategies, but the group itself never really had a combined Africa agenda until recently. How do you think this summit will stand out as different from past summits? Will the G20 commitments reflect all of Africa's priorities this time around?
Well, first of all, I think different from the past is that Africa as a continent, as a unified continent, as a unified economic opportunity will be showcased. Remember, the G20 represents, excuse me, 85% of the world's global economic trade. That is a significant chunk. And now that China is hosting this summit and defining the agenda, it can pretty much direct the conversation in whatever direction it wants. First thing we have to look at is who's who in attendance. The fact that China has invited not just, of course, South Africa attending as a member of the G20, but also Egypt, a guest of honor invited by China, and also Chad as a rotating head of the African Union, and also Senegal. The fact that these countries are attending in Hangzhou shows that African leaders, African bank governors, finance ministers will simply be at the table and part of the discussion. And also China will get to highlight the successes it says that it's had in the African continent, dealing with countries like Ethiopia, the Democratic Republic of Congo, Cote d'Ivoire, Tanzania, Mozambique, and other countries, including Western countries, will try to look at China's success and perhaps emulate it. China will, of course, highlight its approach of mutual respect and cooperation, of a win-win policy. And I think because China is leading this discussion, many will look at the Chinese model and try to see how they can copy it. And China, of course, dealing with Africa, with individual countries at their national levels, but also treating the continent itself as a global opportunity, addressing the issue of Agenda 2063, the African goal of all of its countries to achieve industrialization by 2063. So the fact that that is on the agenda, that those issues will be discussed, will likely see more of an attraction towards the African continent and its economic potential there.
Quite interesting. Well, Mr. Yacoub, suddenly the continent is looking to China this time around to play that mediation role between the developed world and, of course, Africa as well. Now, President Zuma highlighted reducing illicit financial flows as one of the key areas for him. Now, what specific areas do you think Africa is looking to see the G20 address?
I think the African nations is seeking to attract foreign direct investment and to attract the attention of the world major powers participating in the G20 summit to end poverty, to end some civil conflicts in some African countries. I think the major powers need to set a unified plan to address all the challenges which is the African nations are facing, like corruption, like illegal immigration, like developing some industries like agriculture industries and oil and gas industries. I think G20 summit will be an opportunity for the African nations to address and to discuss with the major powers participating in this summit all the challenges Egypt and the other Egypt and South Africa and other nations are facing today.
Well, Rory, let me ask you, this will be the first meeting of world leaders after some major global agreements, such as the Sustainable Development Goals, as you mentioned, COP21 as well. It's also coming at a time when the dynamics on the global economic front are changing. We had a Brexit, there's a global economic slowdown. How do you think all these issues will impact talks taking place at the G20?
Well, I think one thing we have to remember is that the G20 has evolved in recent years. It wasn't until, I think, 2008 where leaders, heads of states, national representatives were invited. Before, it used to be bank governors and finance ministers. And with that came a lot of political discussion. I think at the Chinese summit, the summit hosted in China, we'll see a shift back to specifically talking about issues like trade and investment, but also deregulation. How can you get rid of for example, the obstacles to cross-border trade? We heard a commitment from the G20 leaders that they would like to see an agreement on trade facilitation announced by the end of this year, which means that we could see some pretty strong language coming out of Hangzhou. Let me just give you for an example. Such an agreement could increase global trade by $1 trillion per year, and of course it could be developing countries that could stand to benefit from it. It would create an estimated 20 million new jobs. Half of those expected to be in developing countries. I think China is going to try to change the language at this summit in Hangzhou and also reflect, also show that the focus on issues that highlight the skewed developing trajectory that we've seen in the world. And I think that's important to try to push for changes that will help offset the global sluggishness that we've seen in the economy that has largely been affecting these developing countries like, of course, G20 member South Africa, but also the rest of the African countries, some of those that will be in attendance.
Well, Mr. Yacoub, Egypt will actually be represented by President El-Sisi. He's going to join the G20 meeting for the first time, actually. Now, you mentioned foreign direct investment as one of the key areas for Egypt at this meeting. But of course, there are other issues affecting Egypt as a country as well. For example, the recent terror attacks in Sharm el-Sheikh. Are these some of the other issues that you would like to see being addressed as the G20 goes forward?
China is the largest international partner to Egypt. The trade exchange between Egypt and China is about $13 billion in the last year, 2015. And its growth is about 10% compared to previous year, 2014. I think the participation of the President Abdel Fattah el-Sisi in the G20 summit, aiming to discuss some economic and investment issues with Chinese president and other world leaders. Egyptian government is aiming to attract foreign direct investment with a total amount of $10 billion in the current fiscal year 2016-2017. I think this is a great opportunity for Egypt and the Egyptian delegation which is participating in this summit to discuss some investments which is in Suez Canal zone and the new capital which is Egypt is now focusing on this major projects. And I think Chinese companies are aiming to pump a lot of investment in Egypt in the coming years, and to tackle some Egyptian government aims to tackle some issues like to foster economic growth and to attract foreign direct investment and to boost confidence by dealing with $12 billion loan from the IMF. I think Egypt, the Egyptian President Abdel Fattah Sisi and his delegation will discuss all the major issues, economic and challenges the area of the MENA region are facing right now.
Well, many thanks to both of you for giving us those insights. Of course, Ahmed Yaqub joining us in Egypt and Roy Rottenberg joining us in Washington, D.C.